My daughter told me not to embarrass her at her mother-in-law's mansion, worth over $600,000. Then I heard my son-in-law whisper that I was just a burden. 15 years of sacrifice meant nothing. They thought I was powerless, but one piece of paper would expose a hidden fortune worth over $200 million. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in my small apartment in South Philadelphia, the radiator clanking like it always did on damp nights, the sound filling the silence I had lived with for years. The room smelled faintly of dust and old books, mixed with the fading scent of Margaret's lavender sachets that I never had the heart to throw away. The wallpaper was peeling in the corner, and the floor creaked with every small movement I made. This apartment had been my shelter since Margaret passed, but it never really felt like home, not the way our house once did. That evening, I sat in my armchair, staring at the photographs on the wall. One in particular always drew my eyes. Sarah at her college graduation, smiling under the May sun, wearing that cap and gown that had cost me $60,000 in tuition payments. $60,000 I had scraped together over 4 long years. I remembered every check I wrote, every extra shift I picked up at the shop, every vacation I never took, so that Sarah could walk across that stage debt-free. She looked radiant that day, clutching her diploma, hugging Margaret and me as if we had just handed her the world. In many ways, we had. But memories twist when betrayal sets in. The image no longer gave me pride. Instead, it felt like a cruel joke. My daughter, the girl I once believed would carry our family's values forward, had turned cold, distant, and calculating. When I paid for her education, I thought I was investing in her future, in her independence, in her kindness. I never thought that same education would be used to write cold emails that began with Father, not Dad, not Papa, but Father, as if I were a stranger in a courtroom instead of the man who raised her. And then there was Daniel, my son-in-law. I had once been proud to call him family. I bought him a car so he could commute to work, a used Ford sedan that still cost me $25,000. At the time, it felt like a sacrifice, but one worth making. I told myself I was helping him build stability for Sarah, helping them create a life together. I still remember the way he shook my hand when I handed over the keys. He promised me, with a smile that seemed genuine then, that he would never forget what I had done for them. That promise, like so many others, turned to ash. I even co-signed their mortgage, putting my own credit on the line so they could buy a bigger house than they could afford. I thought I was giving them a foundation. Instead, I gave them leverage. They moved into a grand place in the suburbs, all stone walls and polished floors, while I slowly shrank into this apartment, patching leaks and counting pennies. And now, Daniel dared to plot against me, eyeing the very house Margaret and I built as if it were nothing more than a business opportunity. That house. God, that house. It was worth $650,000 now, maybe more. But to me, it was priceless. Margaret and I bought it in 1978 for just over $45,000, back when the neighborhood was still working class. We renovated it piece by piece with our own hands. I laid the wooden floors myself. Margaret chose the curtains, blue with little white flowers. The fireplace mantel still held our wedding photo, the one with her veil caught in the summer breeze. That home wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was where Sarah learned to ride her bike in the driveway, where Christmas mornings were filled with laughter, and where Margaret used to place fresh flowers on the kitchen table every Sunday. Now Daniel talked about it like it was a line item in a portfolio, something to be flipped or leveraged. He didn't see the years etched into those walls. He didn't hear the echoes of family dinners or Margaret's laughter in the garden. To him, it was simply $650,000. To me, it was my life. And they wanted to take it from me, push me into a nursing facility, and call it for my own good. I thought about the email again, the one Sarah had sent me. Father, it began, formal and cold. She told me to dress appropriately for Eleanor's birthday party, Eleanor being Daniel's wealthy mother. I was not to mention my flower stand, not to bring up embarrassing stories from the past, and not to linger too long with my granddaughter at the event. Every line of that email was a dagger, reminding me how far she had drifted from me, how much she had been reshaped by Daniel's world of status and money. It wasn't just rejection, it was humiliation. My own daughter saw me as something to manage, like a problem she needed to contain. When I read those words, I felt the ground beneath me shift. The girl I once carried on my shoulders through the park, who clung to me when she had nightmares, now treated me like an inconvenience. I whispered to Margaret's photograph, the one I kept on my nightstand. Honey, I raised her with everything I had, with every ounce of sweat and every dollar I could spare. How did it come to this? My voice cracked, and the silence that followed seemed heavier than the walls around me. I missed Margaret with an ache that never dulled. She had been my compass, my partner, my friend. She believed in the dignity of honest work, in the strength of family bonds. She used to tell me, "Richie, don't let them make you small. You're worth more than the size of your paycheck." I had tried to hold on to that, but in moments like this, I felt small indeed. If she were still here, maybe Sarah wouldn't have drifted so far. Maybe Daniel wouldn't have had such power over her. Maybe I wouldn't be sitting here in a worn armchair, wondering how my own family had come to betray me. For a while, the weight of it all crushed me. I felt defeated, erased, like a man waiting quietly for the world to forget him. But something inside me began to stir. Maybe it was Margaret's voice echoing in my memory, or maybe it was the way Daniel's arrogance burned in my chest, like acid. Whatever it was, I started to think beyond the pain. I began to remember. In the back of my closet, hidden beneath boxes of old clothes and Margaret's sewing kit, there was a wooden chest. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were documents Margaret had kept from the 1970s. Papers from her father's old business dealings, contracts signed with Eleanor's family, and records that Daniel had once asked about. He had pressed me years ago, asking casually if I still had those old papers from Margaret's father's company. I told him I didn't know where they were. In truth, I lied. Something in his eager eyes made me wary. Now that memory returned with sudden clarity. What if those papers mattered more than I realized? What if they were the key to everything? The more I thought about it, the more the fog lifted. I began to see their weakness. Daniel believed I was powerless. That age and poverty had stripped me of any ability to fight back. But he didn't know what I still had tucked away. He didn't know that Margaret, even in death, had left me with something that could tip the scales. I rose from the chair, my knees stiff, my back aching, but my resolve stronger than it had been in years. I opened the closet and pulled out the chest. The smell of cedar and dust filled the air. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a pile of Margaret's scarves, was a manila envelope, yellowed with age, edges frayed, but still intact. I slid it out carefully, my breath catching in my throat. Written across the front in Margaret's handwriting were the words, "Do not lose this." I sat back down, the envelope heavy in my hands, heavier than any weight I had carried in years. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared at the writing, feeling her presence beside me. She had kept this safe for decades. She had known it mattered. And now, in this moment of betrayal, it had found its way back to me. The despair that had threatened to drown me began to shift into something else. Determination. Fire. A clarity I hadn't felt in so long. Daniel thought I was an old man, ready to fade. Sarah thought I was an inconvenience. But they were wrong. I still had fight left in me. I still had proof, leverage, something that could shake their perfect world. I whispered again to Margaret's photo, "Honey, I think you left me the key. I think you knew one day I'd need it." As I placed the envelope on the table beside me, I knew this was the beginning of something bigger. I didn't know exactly where it would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not let them erase me. Not from the house, not from my granddaughter's life, not from the legacy Margaret and I built together. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second pushing me closer to a decision. Tomorrow I will open that envelope. Tomorrow I would find out what power Margaret had preserved. Tonight I let the knowledge settle in my bones. The game was not over. In fact, it was just beginning. And so, sitting there in my dimly lit apartment, the peeling wallpaper surrounding me like scars of time, I realized something vital. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken silence for surrender. But I was not finished. I still had my voice, my memories, my proof. And soon they would see. The thought brought the faintest smile to my face, the first in a long time. I touched the envelope once more, feeling its weight, and whispered to myself, "They think they've won, but they have no idea what's coming." I woke before dawn with the manila envelope still sitting on the kitchen table, its edges lit faintly by the street lamp outside. The coffee from the night before had gone cold, but I drank a swallow anyway, just to steady my throat. Sleep had barely touched me. What kept me awake wasn't the radiator clanking or the fridge humming. It was the knowledge that I had reached the turning point. I wasn't just the old man they could push aside anymore. The envelope reminded me of that. Margaret's handwriting in the margins, steady and careful, whispered that she had left me a lifeline. For too long, I had been drifting in grief and humiliation. That morning, I felt a new pulse inside me. The first thing I did was copy every page of the documents. The print shop opened at 8, and I was there waiting by the glass door, jacket pulled tight against the damp air. The young clerk didn't even look up when I placed the papers down. He fed them into the machine, and one by one the sheets slid out, crisp and warm. Each copy felt like a shield, like I was reclaiming small pieces of power. I tucked one set into a plastic sleeve and slid it deep into my kitchen drawer, under the dish towels. The other set I folded into the inner pocket of my blazer. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of security pressing against my chest. Then I turned to my appearance. It had been years since I cared much about what I wore to a family gathering, but this was different. This was war disguised as a birthday. I pulled my old navy blazer from the back of the closet, stitched the loose cuff with thread from Margaret's sewing tin, and carried it to the dry cleaner on the corner. $40 for a rush job. It stung to part with the cash, but I told myself it was the best investment I could make. When I picked it up later, the fabric felt almost new under my hand, the scent of starch sharp and clean. I polished my shoes myself with a rag and a splash of olive oil because the tin of polish had gone dry years ago. The small rituals calmed me, as though Margaret were standing behind me, nodding approval. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I glanced at the clock. The invitation, if you could even call Sarah's cold email an invitation, said 6 o'clock sharp at Eleanor's estate in Rittenhouse Square. I planned to arrive with time to spare. Before leaving, I opened the closet and pulled down my old toolbox. Margaret had always teased me for keeping it in the trunk of the Honda Civic, long after most people would have tossed it. "You never know when someone will need help," she said. Maybe she was right. I set the box in the trunk, double-checked the papers in my jacket, and turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed twice before catching. I whispered a quick prayer, not to God, but to Margaret. "Stay with me tonight. Keep my temper even and my eyes clear." The sky was heavy with rain clouds as I drove, the highway slick with spray. Halfway to Rittenhouse, I noticed hazard lights blinking on the shoulder. A black sedan sat hunched against the guardrail, steam rising from under its hood. A woman stood beside it, phone in her hand, looking defeated. I slowed, pulled in behind her, and switched on my flashers. She gave me the wary glance of someone judging whether to trust a stranger. "Pop the hood," I said, raising my voice over the hiss of rain. "I can take a look." She hesitated, then released the latch. Steam rolled into the air, mixing with the mist. I reached for my toolbox, that old red case with Margaret's initials scratched faintly on the side. My fingers knew what to do even before my mind caught up. The radiator hose had split, a simple but crippling wound. I wrapped it tight with electrical tape as I had done 100 times years ago. "This'll get you 20 miles, I told her. "Exit 31 has a shop. Tell them Richard sent you." She looked at me with sudden relief, then slipped a card from a slim leather case. Natalie Sterling. The name rang in my memory. I had read it in the paper, heard it in conversations about power and money, and now here she was, rain in her hair, gratitude softening her face. "If anyone asks why you're late," she said with a faint smile, "tell them you were with me." It sounded like a joke, but it felt heavier than that, like a line of fate tying itself quietly around us both. We parted, but I carried her name like a hidden ember. By the time I reached Eleanor's estate, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Security guards in pressed uniforms waved me toward the service lot, far from the glowing circle of luxury cars parked near the main entrance. My Honda Civic sat hunched beside catering trucks, its paint dull in comparison. I straightened my blazer, picked up the plastic sleeve, and walked through the gravel toward the rear entrance. The smell of butter and citrus hit me first as I entered, staff rushing in practiced harmony. No one stopped me. I found the hallway and stepped into the ballroom. It was like stepping into another world. Chandeliers glittered, glasses caught the light, and the air buzzed with the kind of laughter money buys. Sarah stood near the center, her hair swept up, her dress pale blue. For a moment, I saw the little girl tugging at her sled in the snow. But the memory collapsed when Daniel appeared beside her. Perfect suit, perfect smile, perfect calculation. His eyes flicked to me, then away, like a man brushing lint from his sleeve. A guard intercepted me, directing me not to the family table, but to a corner behind a large palm tree. The place card read, "Drivers, Childcare." I lowered myself into the chair, linen too smooth under my hands, humiliation pressing into my chest. I forced myself to breathe evenly. I had expected this. Anticipating cruelty doesn't make it hurt less, but it steadies the knees. Then I heard the small voice that could still break me. "Grandpa!" Ethan wriggled free from his nanny and sprinted across the floor, climbing onto my lap with all the joy of a boy who loves without measure. He showed me a crayon drawing folded in his pocket, 2 stick figures holding hands. "You and me," he said proudly. I hugged him close, my throat tight. But Daniel appeared, smiling in that way men smile when they are about to wound you politely. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Let's let the guests mingle," he said. And just like that, he peeled my grandson from my arms. Ethan looked back once, confused, before being steered away. A clean break split through me. I drank water from the glass at my table. No champagne had been poured here. Drivers and nannies ate in silence, careful and invisible. I forced myself to watch, to see clearly the theater of it all. Eleanor swept into the room, radiant in a white gown, her laughter tinkling like silverware. The orchestra struck up a polished tune. Conversations bloomed about deals and profits. It was a world built on marble floors and polite cruelties. Then it happened. A young server carrying a tray brushed a chair, and 3 glasses tipped. One fell against Eleanor's dress, leaving a small shimmering stain. The boy stammered an apology, holding out a napkin. Eleanor's smile vanished. She looked at him as if he were a smudge on her life. "Do you have any idea what this dress costs?" she asked, her voice slicing the air. The room froze. The boy went pale. A manager rushed in, leading him away like smoke from a candle. The humiliation in that moment wasn't mine, but it felt like it was. I knew what it was to be treated as a stain. My face burned, not from shame, but from fury. Around me, the drivers bowed their heads, pretending invisibility. But I saw Natalie in the doorway, dry now, her face composed. She had seen it too. Sometimes it isn't the big betrayals that prove a person's nature. It's the small ones, the casual cruelties that slip out when they believe no one important is watching. Daniel continued his rounds, shaking hands, laughing with investors, his mask flawless. When he reached me, he leaned down and said softly, There's a seat at the family table opening soon, but until then, it's better for everyone if you stay here. Better for everyone? The words lodged like stones. I smiled faintly, steady as I could, and asked him if he had ever learned to change a tire. He blinked, then laughed, dismissing the question. His hand squeezed my shoulder in mock affection before he moved on. Inside, I felt the shift. I was no longer just the man enduring humiliation. I was the man observing, recording, waiting. I texted Maxwell Porter, the attorney who had once handled Margaret's father's documents. "Maxwell, this is Richard Peterson. I have the papers. I'm at the Whitmore event. We need to talk." Minutes later, a reply buzzed through. "Bring everything. Tomorrow morning. My office." Short sentences. The kind you can trust. The orchestra swelled again. Eleanor raised her glass, her voice floating above the crowd. She spoke of legacy, of family honor, of fortunes built and secured. She mentioned a partnership deal worth $480 million. The number hung in the air like incense. People nodded reverently, as if money itself were holy. I sat in the corner, touching the papers in my pocket, reminding myself of Margaret's handwriting, of the clause that mattered most: no transfer without spousal consent. They thought I was powerless, that age had hollowed me out. They thought legacy could be rewritten with one signature. They were wrong. As the applause echoed, Ethan found my eyes again through the palm leaves. He raised his small hand. I raised mine back. It was a quiet pact between us, the boy and the old man they wanted to erase. I folded my hands, calm and steady, and repeated to myself, "They think I'm finished. They think I'm small, but they have no idea what I carry." The night was not over. The storm had only begun. When I woke the next morning, rain tapped lightly against the kitchen window, a steady rhythm, like fingers reminding me not to falter. The manila envelope was still there, on the table, alongside the second set of copies I had made. I touched it once, then tucked it back into my jacket pocket. It felt like armor, the kind Margaret herself had sewn together for me. I brewed coffee, black and bitter, and let it sit heavy in my stomach. The night before had changed something inside me. I no longer felt like the humiliated old man in the corner of the ballroom. I was carrying proof, and with that proof came power. I repeated those words under my breath. Power. Proof. Margaret's handwriting is guiding me. By noon, I was on my way back toward Rittenhouse Square. Maxwell Porter, the lawyer who had replied so briskly to my text, had agreed to meet me before the celebration resumed that evening. His office was paneled in dark wood, with old law books lining the shelves. He looked older than I remembered, but his handshake was firm, his eyes sharp. He leafed through the documents slowly, nodding, humming, pausing at certain clauses. When he finally looked up, he spoke in a voice that carried both certainty and weight. "Richard, these are genuine. Margaret's father never sold those shares. They were never transferred. Legally, they belong to Margaret's estate, and as her surviving spouse, they belong to you. That means Eleanor and Daniel have been operating on pretenses. They've built an empire on sand." My chest tightened. The words felt like a verdict, but not against me. For once, against them. "So what does that mean?" I asked. Maxwell leaned forward, tapping the papers. "It means you own a controlling interest in Whitmore Sterling Enterprises. Not them. You. If they've leveraged the company, if they've made deals without proper authority, every one of those deals could collapse. Richard, you're holding the fuse to a bomb they don't even know is lit." I sat back, letting the words settle. For years, I had lived as if my legacy was gone, as if I had nothing left but a tired apartment and fading memories. And here it was, written in ink, notarized decades ago, my name tethered to something worth hundreds of millions. I whispered so only I could hear. "Margaret, you were always smarter than I. You knew they'd try this one day." Maxwell gave me a copy in a neat folder, advised me to keep it close, and said he'd be at Eleanor's event later that evening, just in case matters escalated. His calmness steadied me. I left his office with the folder pressed tight under my arm, walking with a stride I hadn't felt in years. By the time evening came, the estate was alive again, lights glittering against wet pavement, black cars pulling in one after another. I parked my Honda in the same service lot, but I didn't feel small this time. I felt like a man with thunder in his pocket. Inside, the ballroom shimmered once more with silk dresses and polished shoes. The orchestra played a waltz, and champagne flowed like water. Eleanor glided among the guests, her smile bright, her diamonds sharp as ice. Daniel and Sarah were near the front, basking in the glow of wealth and influence. Ethan spotted me from across the room and waved, but Daniel's hand came down quickly, guiding the boy away as though even acknowledgment might tarnish their performance. Then the doors opened, and every head turned. Natalie Sterling entered, rain-slick hair now styled into a sleek frame, her gown dark emerald. She carried herself like a storm contained in silk. Eleanor hurried toward her with Daniel in tow, the crowd parting as if royalty had arrived. "Natalie!" Eleanor gushed, arms wide, but Natalie raised a hand, her voice clear and commanding. "Where's the man who helped me on the highway last night?" The question cut through the music. The spotlight, almost as if by design, swept across the ballroom and landed squarely on me. Chairs creaked as faces turned. Daniel's smile faltered, Sarah's eyes darted, and Eleanor's hand froze mid-air. I stood slowly, the old blazer sitting square on my shoulders, and met Natalie's gaze. She smiled faintly, nodding once, as though we had rehearsed this moment. The murmurs rippled through the room. Guests whispered, "Who is he?" "And that's her rescuer?" Daniel scrambled forward, laughing too loudly. "Ah, yes, that's my wife's father," he said, voice dripping with false warmth. "Just a lucky coincidence." Natalie's eyes narrowed. "No," she said evenly, "not a coincidence. Integrity." I could feel the room shift, the tide pulling. But Daniel wasn't finished. He motioned for Ethan, pulling him forward by the shoulder. "Ethan, come here. Meet someone truly important." He knelt, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is Natalie Sterling, a woman who makes things happen in the real world." Ethan blinked, then looked toward me. "But what about Grandpa?" he asked. His small voice carried across the hushed ballroom. Daniel chuckled, too quick, too forced. "Grandpa's just, well, he's family, but he doesn't matter in these kinds of things. He's an outsider." The words slammed into me like a fist. Outsider. Said in front of my grandson, in front of strangers, in front of Margaret's memory. My jaw tightened, but before I could speak, Natalie straightened, her eyes cold fire. "Outsider?" she repeated, her voice slicing. "That's not what I see." The silence deepened. Eleanor fluttered her hand as if to dismiss it, but Natalie pressed forward. "In fact, I recognize his name, Margaret Peterson. She and Eleanor were original investors, weren't they?" The room stirred. People leaned closer, whispers multiplying. I saw Eleanor's face drain of color and Daniel's smirk collapse into something tighter. Sarah looked at her feet, frozen. And then the final chord struck. Maxwell Porter stepped through the doors, briefcase in hand, his presence calm and steady. He walked to me, handed me a folder, and turned to the crowd. His voice was deliberate, every word weighted. "I have here notarized documentation proving that Margaret Peterson's shares in Whitmore Sterling Enterprises were never sold, never transferred, which means by law they belong to her estate. And as her surviving spouse, Richard Peterson is the rightful owner of the controlling interest." The room erupted, gasps, whispers, and even laughter of disbelief. Daniel's face flushed crimson, his fists clenched. "That's impossible," he shouted, breaking the polished decorum of the night. "We've been running this company for years. Those documents are forged." If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Forged? They carry state seals, signatures, and dates that can be verified by any court. You can try to dispute them, but you'll fail." Eleanor's voice cracked, a sharp edge of desperation. "This is nonsense. Margaret was family, yes, but she relinquished—" I stepped forward, my voice low but firm, carrying in the sudden hush. She relinquished nothing. Margaret protected her legacy because she knew what greed would do to you. She saw it before I did, and she was right. Sarah finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Dad, I didn't know. I didn't know about any of this." Daniel snapped his head toward her, anger spilling over. "Don't believe him. He's spinning stories to embarrass us. He's nothing, Sarah, nothing but a bitter old man trying to cling to relevance." I turned, meeting his fury with steady calm. "Nothing?" I said softly. "Nothing doesn't hold the deed? Nothing doesn't hold the controlling shares? Nothing doesn't have lawyers willing to stand behind the truth?" I pulled the papers from my jacket, held them high, then laid them flat on the table nearest me. The crowd surged closer, eyes hungry for scandal. Daniel lunged, grabbing at the folder, but Natalie stepped between us. "Enough!" she snapped. "I saw him on the highway. I saw the man you all call an outsider fix a car with his bare hands without expectation of reward. That's not nothing. That's character, and character holds more value than all the dollars you boast about." The applause started small, then spread, polite at first, then firmer. I saw investors nodding, allies shifting their weight. The balance had changed. The empire Eleanor and Daniel had built on arrogance was crumbling in plain sight. Daniel's voice broke, shrill now. "This isn't fair. We've built everything, we've sacrificed, we've hosted, we've—" I cut him off, calm, steady. "Sacrificed? You built on lies. You treated people like dirt. You treated me like dirt. But the truth doesn't care about your banquets or your tailored suits. The truth stands whether you like it or not." Eleanor tried to gather herself, her jewels shaking with her trembling hand. "We can settle this quietly," she said, desperation seeping through. "Richard, surely we can come to an arrangement, a generous one?" I shook my head slowly. "No, you stripped me of dignity. You tried to erase Margaret's name. You tried to teach my grandson that I was nothing. I won't settle, not for money, not for peace, not for anything less than justice." The silence that followed was heavy, final. I looked toward Ethan, who still stood near Sarah. His eyes were wide, but he smiled faintly, as if he knew something had shifted forever. Maxwell gathered the papers, preparing the next steps. The room buzzed with tension, half scandal, half revelation. Guests whispered about lawsuits, board meetings, and collapsing deals. Eleanor sank into a chair. Daniel paced like a caged animal, and Sarah wept quietly into her hand. I stood taller than I had in years. I whispered just loud enough for myself, though I saw Natalie catch the words. "They thought I was finished, but the game is only beginning." The morning after the party, I sat by the kitchen window with a mug of coffee in my hand. The papers Maxwell had given me lay spread across the table, the black ink sharp against the pale paper. I had read them twice already, but I kept turning back to the line that mattered most: controlling interest, 51%, belonging to me. For years I had been made to feel invisible, discarded, and treated like a burden. And now, with one line of ink, I was back in the center of it all. It didn't feel like victory yet. It felt heavy, like standing at the edge of a storm I still had to walk through. Maxwell had promised that he would handle the legal filings immediately. He was calm, methodical, and he made me believe that this mountain could be moved one careful stone at a time. But he also told me something else. "Richard, you're not just holding numbers on paper, you're holding leverage. How you use it will define not only the company, but also your family's future. Decide carefully. You can crush them if you want, but crushing isn't always winning." I nodded, though at that moment I wasn't sure what winning meant anymore. By noon, Natalie called. Her voice was steady, the same tone she had used when she asked about me in front of everyone. "Richard, people are already talking. The investors are shaken. Daniel is trying to spin the story, saying you're confused, that you're clinging to documents no one has seen before. But they saw you stand tall last night. They saw the truth in your face. You can't step back now. You need to step forward." Step forward. The words echoed. For too long I had stepped aside. I told her I would meet her and Maxwell that afternoon in Maxwell's office. I hung up and looked around my little apartment. Margaret's photograph sat on the mantel. I whispered, "I'll do it, Maggie. I'll see this through." At Maxwell's office, the atmosphere was different from the quiet meeting the day before. Stacks of papers lay open, and his assistant answered phones non-stop. Natalie sat across from me, her posture sharp, her eyes fixed on the numbers. Maxwell pointed to the sheets. "Here's what we know. Richard, you own 51% of Whitmore Sterling Enterprises. Current valuation is over $210 million. In addition, we found records of dividends over the past 15 years. $38 million were dispersed to Eleanor and Daniel without legal authority. That's theft, plain and simple. You can demand repayment through the courts." I felt the number strike me like thunder. 38 million. Money that could have changed everything, money taken behind my back while I was told to keep quiet. My first instinct was rage. My hand shook as I pushed the paper back. They took this from Margaret's memory. They took it from Ethan's future, and they treated me like I was in the way while they did it. Natalie leaned forward. "You can take it all back. You can freeze accounts, demand restitution, or even press criminal charges, but the question is, what do you want?" What did I want? The numbers were staggering, but I knew money alone wasn't the answer. I wanted dignity. I wanted Ethan to know his grandfather mattered. I wanted Daniel to look me in the eye and see the man he tried to erase. I wanted Sarah to understand what loyalty meant. I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I said, "It's not revenge I want. It's justice. Justice for Margaret, for me, and for Ethan. But I want it done in a way that leaves no doubt about what matters most." That night, I called a family meeting. Eleanor resisted at first, but Maxwell made it clear. Without my approval, the board could not proceed with any deals. They had no choice but to sit down with me. We gathered not at the glittering estate, but in a conference room, plain walls, a long table, the sound of the air conditioner humming overhead. Eleanor entered first, still elegant but shaken, her jewelry unable to mask the tightness in her jaw. Daniel followed, restless, eyes darting, his arrogance fraying at the edges. Sarah came last, shoulders slumped, avoiding my eyes. And then Ethan slipped in beside her, clutching a small toy car in his hand. I stood at the head of the table. For a moment, I felt the years roll back. I remembered standing in classrooms as a young teacher, commanding silence with nothing more than a raised hand. I remembered Margaret at my side, steady as stone. I spoke slowly, clearly. "You've taken much from me. You've taken money, yes. 38 million in dividends that never belonged to you. But worse, you tried to take my dignity. You tried to teach my grandson that I was nothing, that I was an outsider." Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We built this company, not you. You wouldn't even understand how it works?" I didn't flinch. "I understand enough to know the law is on my side. I own 51%. That means I decide how this company moves forward, and I've made my decision." They leaned in, expecting punishment, expecting fury. Instead, I laid out my conditions, each one deliberate. "First, we will have a family dinner every week. Not at this table, not at Eleanor's estate. At a simple place where Ethan can see us as family. If you refuse, you lose my vote on the board. Second, Ethan will see me whenever he chooses. No interference. Third, Daniel, you will perform 500 hours of community service. You speak about building an empire. Now you will learn to serve people who have nothing. Fourth, Eleanor, you will retire from the company, effective immediately. You've had your time. Now it's over." The room fell silent. Eleanor's face blanched, her lips trembling. Daniel exploded. "This is insane. You can't dictate our lives like this." Maxwell's voice cut in, calm and sharp. "He can. He's the majority shareholder. These are terms. If you refuse, he'll take you to court for theft and fraud. You'll lose everything." Sarah burst into tears. "Dad, please, I didn't know. I never wanted it to go this far." I looked at her, my heart heavy but steady. You didn't stop it either. You let them treat me like nothing. You let Ethan believe I was unworthy. That wound will take time to heal. Ethan suddenly slipped from his chair and ran to me, arms wrapping tight around my waist. His voice was small but strong. Grandpa is my hero. Those 4 words broke the last wall inside me. I held him close, my eyes wet, my heart full. Thank you, Ethan, I whispered. Daniel looked stricken, fury mixing with fear. Eleanor sagged in her chair, defeated. Sarah wiped her face, lost between shame and longing. For the first time, the balance had shifted, not because of money, but because of truth. I pressed my hand against the table, firm. This isn't revenge. This is justice. Justice for Margaret, who trusted me to protect her legacy. Justice for myself, after years of being erased. Justice for Ethan, who deserves to grow up knowing the value of honesty and love. The meeting ended not with handshakes, but with silence. They left one by one, broken in different ways. Maxwell gathered the papers, nodded to me, and said, "It's done." The days that followed were strange. News spread quickly, investors adjusting, lawyers scrambling, reporters sniffing around. Eleanor announced her retirement, her once proud voice subdued. Daniel began his community service, photographing and cleaning parks, his face a mask of bitterness. Sarah tried calling me twice, her voice messages filled with tears, but I let them go unanswered. Some wounds cannot be patched with apologies. I moved out of the old apartment 2 weeks later. With Maxwell's help, I sold the smaller properties attached to my shares and bought a modest condo near the park. 2 bedrooms, one for me, one for Ethan when he visited. The windows looked out over trees that turned gold in the fall. The kitchen smelled new, the floors gleamed, but I filled it with familiar things. Margaret's vase, Ethan's drawings, the old photo album. It wasn't a palace. It was peace. One evening, as I sat on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky, I thought about what had been lost and what had been gained. Eleanor's empire had shrunk. Daniel's pride had been shattered. Sarah's silence had cost her my trust. But I had gained something money couldn't buy. I had regained my voice. I had shown Ethan what justice looked like, and I had kept Margaret's legacy alive. Sarah tried once more, showing up at my new door with red eyes and trembling hands. She asked to come in, asked for forgiveness. I listened quietly, but when she finished, I shook my head. I can't carry your guilt for you, Sarah. You'll have to walk that road yourself. I don't need apologies anymore. I need peace. I closed the door gently, not in anger, but in finality. That night I sat at my desk and wrote in a notebook. I wrote the words that had carried me through. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who honors your dignity. Truth is the inheritance no one can steal. I closed the notebook and felt lighter. A week later, Natalie called again. She told me about a local group that restored old community gardens and asked if I wanted to join. I said yes. It felt right. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted to live in a way that gave back. Ethan came with me the first Saturday, his small hands digging in the soil beside mine. He laughed when we found worms, and I laughed with him. For the first time in years, the laughter didn't hurt. It healed. Standing there with dirt under my nails and the sun warm on my shoulders, I felt something Margaret had always wanted for me. Freedom. Not the freedom of money or titles, but the freedom of knowing I had chosen dignity over silence. As I rinsed my hands in the garden's old spigot, I whispered, I don't need them anymore. I have myself, and I have Ethan. That's enough. The road ahead wasn't perfect. Scars remained, trust was broken, and the years couldn't be undone. But I no longer carried the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. I carried the weight of truth, and it was light enough to let me walk tall again. When I first turned the key to my new condo, I felt the silence greet me like an old friend. It wasn't the suffocating silence of being ignored at family dinners, or the kind that weighed heavily when Sarah stopped calling me Dad and chose Father instead. This was different, This was peace. The condo wasn't grand. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a balcony overlooking the park. The price was $200,000, and for the first time in decades, I felt I had spent money on something that belonged only to me. No hidden strings, no debts owed, no sacrifices demanded. Just mine. I placed Margaret's photo on the small oak table by the window, the one piece of furniture I had refused to leave behind. Her smile in that picture was still alive, still carrying me forward. I whispered the words that had been circling in my heart ever since the courtroom battle and the family confrontation. I don't need their apology. I have my life, my dignity, my peace. Saying it aloud felt like closing a door that had been open too long, letting in too much cold air. The condo smelled faintly of new paint, but I brought in pieces of the past to make it mine. Margaret's vase filled with fresh daisies, Ethan's drawing of a crooked little house taped to the fridge, the old watch my father once wore now resting on my nightstand. Every corner reminded me that dignity isn't found in marble floors or chandeliers. It's found in the freedom to live without fear of betrayal. It's found in waking up and knowing you owe nothing to anyone who once tried to erase you. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. News about my family traveled fast, as it always does in circles where money and reputation mean everything. Daniel lost his position at the company after refusing my conditions. Investors no longer wanted a man whose arrogance had become a liability. He drifted from job to job, his once polished image reduced to whispers of failure. Eleanor, once the queen of that glittering empire, retreated into her mansion, a place that now seemed more like a mausoleum than a home. People said she spent her days walking through empty halls, curtains drawn, servants dismissed. The woman who once demanded admiration was now surrounded only by silence. Sarah, my Sarah. She tried the hardest. She wrote letters, left voicemails, and even waited outside the condo once. But I held the line. I answered none of them. Because forgiveness, as I've learned, is not owed. It is chosen, and sometimes the choice is not to give it at all. I did not shut her out from cruelty. I shut her out to save myself. Each boundary I held was a stone in the foundation of the peace I was building. I knew she had to live with her decisions just as I had to live with mine. That was the hardest truth. Sometimes love isn't enough to erase betrayal. My days took on a new rhythm. Mornings began with walks in the park. I watched the sunlight spill across the grass, children chasing each other, older men like me feeding pigeons, and mothers pushing strollers. Life went on, and for the first time, I felt I was part of it instead of an afterthought. Afternoons were for the Margaret Whitmore Foundation, the small quay I had created with part of my settlement. It wasn't massive, just enough to help fund job training programs for young people from poor neighborhoods. Maxwell helped set it up legally, Natalie connected me with organizers, and soon I found myself sitting in a community center on Saturdays, watching kids learn to repair bicycles, to cook, to code, to paint. One Saturday, as I knelt in the dirt of a small community garden behind the center, I heard a familiar voice. "Grandpa!" I turned, and there was Ethan, running toward me, dirt already on his sneakers, a smile brighter than the sun above us. Sarah had let him come on his own. She didn't step into the garden, but she didn't stop him either. Ethan threw his arms around me, and in that moment I felt more wealth than any boardroom could ever promise. He worked beside me that day, planting saplings, watering the soil, asking endless questions about Margaret, about me, about what it meant to start over. Watching him dig his small hands into the earth, I saw hope, not just for him, but for myself. I remembered whispering to Margaret once during my lowest nights that I feared our grandson would only know me through the cruel words of others. But here he was, side by side with me, building something real, something alive. Justice had given me leverage, but love gave me legacy. In those quiet evenings at the condo, I often reflected on what all of this had taught me. Betrayal has a way of cutting deepest when it comes from those we love. but it also has a way of teaching us what love should truly look like. I realized that being a parent doesn't mean surrendering your dignity in exchange for affection. Parents must draw boundaries, even with their children. We raise them, we sacrifice for them, we give our best years to them. But we are not meant to be discarded when they decide we no longer serve their comfort. That is the first lesson I wish to give every parent listening. Your worth does not end where your children's entitlement begins. Protect your dignity as fiercely as you once protected them. For children, the lesson is different, but just as vital. Respect is not something you inherit. It is something you give. Gratitude is the bridge between generations, and when it collapses, families collapse with it. Money will tempt you, inheritance will whisper promises, but the measure of who you are will always be how you treat the people who gave you life. If you treat them as obstacles, as embarrassments, you will eventually face the loneliness of your own choices. Sarah learned that too late. I pray others learn it sooner. And then there is the broader lesson for everyone living in this restless modern world. We chase money, we chase titles, we chase the appearance of success. But strip away the cars, the houses, the parties, and what remains is character. Character is the one inheritance no one can steal. It is the currency that never loses value, even when bank accounts run dry. That is what I want people to carry with them. In the end, all the zeros in a balance sheet mean nothing compared to the truth of how you lived. One evening, as the sun sank and painted the sky in shades of gold and violet, I sat by my window, looking at Margaret's photo. I thought about the years of silence, the years of being told I was less than, and how all of that had finally been broken. I thought about the garden, about Ethan's laughter, about the quiet dignity of living on my own terms. And I whispered, I finally became myself, and that's worth more than all their money combined. Daniel tried once, months later, to send me an email. He wrote about second chances, about how he was rebuilding, about how maybe someday we could talk. I read it once, then deleted it. Not with anger, not with joy, but with certainty, because I did not need his words anymore. The silence that followed was not empty. It was freedom. Eleanor remained in her mansion, her name slowly fading from the circles that once worshipped her. And Sarah, she sent one last letter. In it, she wrote of regret, of nights spent crying, of a longing to undo what was done. I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and never answered. Some doors must remain closed so that new ones can stay open. Life is quieter now, but richer in ways I never imagined. I attend the community garden every Saturday. I read books Margaret once loved. I take Ethan for ice cream after his soccer games. I walk in the park and watch the seasons turn. I find joy in small things, sunlight through leaves, the smell of rain, the laughter of children who have nothing yet somehow have everything. Looking back, I see betrayal not only as a wound but as a teacher. It stripped away illusions, forced me to draw lines, and showed me that dignity cannot be negotiated. I carry that lesson with me every day. And if anyone asks me what wealth means, I tell them this. Wealth is not the empire Eleanor built, or the millions Daniel lost. Wealth is the peace I feel when I lock my door at night, knowing I chose myself. Wealth is Ethan's arms around me, calling me his hero. Wealth is Margaret's smile watching over me, telling me I kept my promise. And so I end this chapter of my life not in bitterness, but in completion. To the parents out there, never forget that your dignity is not a gift to give away. To the children, never forget that gratitude is the only way to honor the blood that runs in your veins. And to every person listening in this restless age, remember that money fades, titles fade, even family ties can break, but character endures. I have finally become myself. And in that simple truth, I have found a fortune greater than all the rest. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.